They left on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning that smells like toast and rain and promises adults don't keep. My mother kissed the top of my head without bending down. My father checked his watch while reminding me, again, that the neighbor might check in. Then he pressed a crumpled $20 bill into my palm like it was a joke we were all supposed to laugh at later. I was 11. They rolled their suitcases down the driveway, glossy and expensive, wheels humming like they were excited. Europe for a month. Italy, France, places I had only seen in textbooks and travel commercials. My parents smiled the way people do when they're about to be free of something inconvenient. Me, the door closed, the house went quiet. At first I didn't understand what had happened. I thought maybe they'd forgotten something. Milk, a charger, me. I sat on the couch with the $20 spread flat on the coffee table, smoothing it with my fingers like that might make it multiply. By day 2, the refrigerator was almost empty. By day 4, I was eating dry cereal out of a mug to save milk. I learned quickly that hunger doesn't feel dramatic. It's dull, heavy. It makes time slow down. School noticed before anyone else did. I started wearing the same hoodie every day. My lunchbox stayed empty. I lied easily, said I wasn't hungry, said I forgot it, said everything was fine. Kids learn that word early. Fine. At night, the house scared me. Every sound felt louder when no one was supposed to be there with you. I slept with the lights on to save myself from my own thoughts, then turned them off to save electricity because $20 doesn't stretch far when you're responsible for staying alive. I called my parents once. The call went to voicemail. I left a message that tried very hard not to sound like a child who was scared. Hi, just checking in. Everything's okay. It wasn't. By the second week, the neighbor hadn't come. No notes, no knocks. I washed my clothes in the bathtub because I didn't know how the machine worked and was afraid of breaking it. I learned how to boil pasta from a library book. I learned that hunger can make you dizzy enough to sit on the kitchen floor and wait for the room to stop spinning. What I didn't know was that my parents were posting photos. Wine glasses in Paris, beach smiles in Spain, a birthday party in a rented villa somewhere warm and loud and full of people who assumed they were good parents because they looked like good people. The school counselor called child services after I fainted during morning assembly. I woke up with a juice box pressed to my lips and an adult voice asking gentle questions that felt sharp anyway. Who's at home with you? When did you last eat? Do your parents know you're here alone? The answer landed like a bomb in a quiet room. They didn't bring drama. They brought clipboards, calm faces, a car ride I didn't remember getting into. Someone bought me a sandwich and waited until I finished before asking anything else. That's how I learned the difference between real care and the kind that just looks good in photos. 3 weeks later, my parents returned early. Not because they were worried, but because police walked into their party. Right in the middle of music and laughter and raised glasses. Someone tapped my father's shoulder while my mother was mid-toast. The question was simple. Where is your child? They said my name like it was a misunderstanding. Like I was misplaced luggage. I didn't see them that night. Or the next. I stayed in a quiet room with clean sheets and rules that made sense. For the first time in a month, I slept without fear. Years passed. I grew up. I learned how to count money, how to read people, how to recognize neglect even when it's dressed in luxury. I learned that abandonment doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it looks like passports and smiles and excuses. My parents rebuilt their lives carefully. They told a softer version of the story. Travel stress, miscommunication, an overreaction. They hosted parties again. They laughed loudly again. They didn't expect me to remember everything, but I did. When I was grown, stable, and very no longer small, I didn't confront them with shouting or tears. I confronted them with facts, reports, timelines, the photos they'd posted while I was counting cereal pieces, the official records they assumed would disappear. I didn't need revenge that looked like destruction. I chose something quieter. Permanent. Their friends found out. Employers asked questions. Invitations stopped coming. The story finally matched the truth, and it followed them everywhere they went. As for me, I built a life where no child depends on someone who sees them as optional. I keep emergency cash in every drawer, not because I'm afraid now, but because I remember what it felt like to be 11, holding a single $20 bill, trying to stretch it into love. They went to Europe for a month. They came back to consequences, and I never went hungry again. People assume the story ends when the authorities step in, when the papers are signed, when adults finally face a room they can't charm their way out of. It doesn't. That's just where the noise stops and the quiet work begins. I moved through foster homes that smelled like different dinners and different rules. Some were kind, some were careless in quieter ways, but none of them forgot I existed. That alone felt like a miracle. I learned how to pack my life into trash bags without crying. I learned how to answer questions about my parents with a neutral voice that didn't invite pity. Pity felt too close to hunger. My parents tried to reach out once the shock wore off. Letters first, then emails. Apologies written like press releases, carefully worded, never quite landing on the truth. They said they were young. They said they made a mistake. They said they loved me. They never said they left me alone. I didn't respond. Silence was the first boundary I ever set, and it held. Growing up without them taught me things school never did. I learned how to spot lies by how smoothly they're delivered. I learned that money can disappear faster than safety. I learned that love isn't what people say when they're leaving. It's what they arrange before they go. By the time I turned 18, I had a job, a plan, and a file thick enough to remind me why I never wanted to depend on anyone again. I put myself through school slowly, stubbornly. Every achievement felt heavier because I carried it alone, but it was mine, fully mine. Years later, my mother saw me in a grocery store. She froze like she'd seen a ghost that had learned how to stand taller. She said my name softly, like testing whether she still had the right. I looked at her the way you look at a stranger who knows too much about you. She asked how I was doing. I told her the truth. I'm safe. That was all she needed to know. The consequences they faced weren't loud or cinematic. No handcuffs, no headlines. Just a slow erosion of reputation, trust, and certainty. People stopped asking them for advice. Stopped inviting them on trips. Stopped assuming they were good simply because they smiled well. And I stopped being afraid of empty houses. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that $20 bill. How light it felt. How heavy it was at the same time. It taught me something no gift ever could. That survival can begin with almost nothing. But dignity comes from never letting anyone convince you that you were worth that little. They left me once. I built a life they'll never be part of. And that was the part of the story I chose for myself. Time has a way of sanding down the sharpest memories, but it doesn't erase them. It just changes how you carry them. I stopped carrying mine like a wound and started carrying it like proof. Proof that I could endure silence. Proof that I could feed myself when no one thought to. Proof that being left behind didn't mean being left unfinished. As an adult, I built routines that felt boring to other people. Weekly grocery lists, emergency contacts written twice, calendars filled months in advance. Boring felt like safety. Predictable felt like love. I learned to celebrate small, quiet wins because no one ever took them away from me. My parents aged faster than I expected. Guilt does that when it finally settles in. We never reconciled, not because I was angry, but because reconciliation requires shared truth. They still wanted a version where they were careless, not cruel. I wasn't willing to shrink my childhood to protect their comfort. The last time I heard about them, they were planning another trip. Shorter this time. Careful. Always careful now. I felt nothing when I heard. No anger, no sadness, just distance, clean and complete. What stayed with me wasn't the neglect. It was the moment someone noticed. The juice box, the sandwich, the adult who waited until I was full before asking questions. That moment rewired something in me. It taught me that help exists, even if it arrives late. I became that person for others when I could. The one who checks in. The one who doesn't assume. The one who makes sure no child ever has to stretch $20 into a month of survival. People sometimes ask how I turned out so steady after being abandoned so young. I tell them the truth. I learned early that being alone isn't the same as being helpless. That family is a choice proven by actions. That freedom isn't leaving. It's making sure no one you love is left behind. They went to Europe and forgot me. I stayed, grew, and remembered myself. And that's where the story ends. Quietly, safely, with a life that no one can ever take away again. Even now, when my life is full and ordinary in the best ways, there are moments that bring it back without warning. The sound of rolling suitcases in an airport. A vacation photo someone shows me on their phone. A parent rushing ahead of a child without looking back. The memory doesn't hurt anymore. It just reminds me how far I've come. I own my home now. It isn't big, and it isn't flashy, but it's stocked with food, warmth, and a kind of peace that doesn't depend on anyone's promises. There's always more than $20 in my wallet. There's always a plan. There's always room for someone who needs help, even if they don't know how to ask for it yet. Sometimes I imagine that 11-year-old version of myself sitting at the kitchen table, counting coins, listening to the house breathe around them. I wish I could tell them what I know now, that this wasn't the end of their story, just the beginning of their strength. That the people who left didn't get to define how loved they would be for the rest of their life. My parents never apologized in a way that mattered. They never fully admitted what they did, and I no longer need them to. Closure didn't come from their words. It came from building something they never could. A sense of responsibility that doesn't disappear when it's inconvenient. The police walking into that party wasn't the most important moment. The most important moment was much quieter. It was the day I realized I didn't have to keep surviving anymore. I could live. They gave me $20 and a locked door. I gave myself a future. And no matter where they travel now, no matter how carefully they curate their lives, that truth goes with them. I was left behind once. I was never left broken. There's a strange power in knowing the worst already happened and you survived it. Nothing scares me the way that empty house once did. Nothing feels as uncertain as those nights when I counted footsteps that never came back. Everything after that has been manageable. I don't hate my parents. Hate requires energy, and I learned early to conserve mine. What I feel is clarity. The kind that lets you walk away without looking back, without wondering if you were wrong. I know exactly what happened. I lived it. Every so often, someone brings them up casually, not knowing the history. They mention a smile, a trip, a charming story. I nod politely. I let them keep their illusion. Truth doesn't need to announce itself. It waits. It always does. What people never see are the small choices that shaped me. Locking doors twice, stocking pantries, checking in on people who go quiet. Those habits weren't born from fear anymore. They were born from care. From the decision to be the adult I once needed. If there's justice in this story, it isn't loud. It isn't public. It's waking up every day in a life that feels safe. It's knowing no one can abandon me again because I learned how to stand on my own. They went to Europe thinking they were escaping responsibility. I stayed and learned how to carry it. And that, quietly, completely, was the revenge. Years later, when I finally allowed myself to rest, I understood something I couldn't have known at 11. Survival teaches you how to move. Healing teaches you when to stop. I stopped proving myself. stopped bracing for abandonment, stopped mistaking independence for loneliness. The house I live in now doesn't echo, it hums. With routines, with laughter, with the certainty that if I leave, it's by choice. And if I stay, it's because I'm wanted. I never confronted my parents again. Not because I was afraid, but because there was nothing left to retrieve from them. No apology could return a childhood. No explanation could outweigh the silence of that locked door. Some truths don't need closure. They need distance. What I took from that month wasn't bitterness. It was precision. I know exactly who deserves access to my life. I know exactly what love looks like when it's real. It shows up. It prepares. It stays. That $20 didn't break me. The abandonment didn't define me. It sharpened me. They went on a trip and lost their child forever. Not to the system, not to the law, but to consequence. I grew up. I stayed whole. And I never waited for footsteps at the door again. There's one last thing people never ask about: what forgiveness looks like when it isn't reconciliation. For me, it looks like neutrality. Like walking past old memories without stopping to bleed on them. Like knowing I don't owe access to anyone who failed the basics. I don't flinch when the past comes up anymore. It sits where it belongs. Behind me. Contained. Powerless. The child who waited learned patience. The adult who survived learned choice. And choice is a kind of freedom no one can take. Sometimes I hear stories about parents who sacrifice everything for their kids. I believe those stories. I've seen that kind of love too. It didn't come from the people who made me, but it found me anyway. Teachers, caseworkers, friends who noticed when my fridge was empty, strangers who showed up without applause. That's how I know family isn't blood. It's behavior. My parents once gave me $20 in silence. Life gave me something better. Awareness, strength, and a future built on intention. They never expected the world to look too closely. It did, and I never expected to be okay. I am. That's the ending they didn't plan for. If there's anything left to say, it's this. The story didn't turn me into someone hard. It turned me into someone careful with love. I don't give it casually, and I don't accept it halfway. When people show me who they are, I believe them the first time. I keep the lights on in my house at night, not because I'm afraid of the dark, but because I like knowing I can. I buy groceries without counting coins. I plan trips only when everyone who depends on me is accounted for. Responsibility doesn't feel like a burden anymore. It feels like dignity. That month when I was 11 still exists somewhere in time, frozen and distant. But it no longer reaches into my present. It doesn't get to decide how safe I feel, how deeply I trust myself, or how fully I live. They left me once, thinking I'd be fine. They were wrong about one thing. I wasn't fine. I was stronger than they ever imagined. And I built a life so steady, so intentional, that their absence became just another fact. Never again a wound. That's all there is now. A quiet house. A full fridge. A future that stayed. There's nothing dramatic left after that. No final confrontation. No speech that fixes the past. Just days that arrive calmly and leave the same way. I wake up without checking who's missing. I leave the house knowing someone will notice if I don't come back. I've built a life where absence is no longer normal, where care doesn't have to be earned by surviving quietly. What happened to me didn't disappear. It settled. It became part of my foundation instead of a crack in it. I don't relive that month anymore. I understand it. I know exactly why it mattered, and exactly why it no longer controls me. They made a choice once that lasted a lifetime. So did I. I chose to stay present. I chose to protect what depends on me. I chose to never confuse freedom with abandonment again. The house is quiet tonight, but it's the good kind of quiet. The kind that means everything is where it should be. And for the first time, That includes me. After all these years, the story no longer feels like something that happened to me. It feels like something I walked through and left behind. I don't measure my life against theirs. I don't wonder if they regret it. Regret belongs to people who still think about what they lost. I think about what I built. There's a steadiness in my days now. A confidence that doesn't announce itself. I trust my instincts. I trust my preparation. I trust that if something goes wrong, I won't be alone in it. Not because someone promised, but because I chose people who stay. That month taught me something permanent. Love is not assumed. It is demonstrated, over and over. In small, unglamorous ways, they chose a trip. I chose a life rooted in care. And every ordinary day I live now, every meal, every locked door, every quiet night, I choose myself again. Nothing is missing anymore. That's how it truly ends. What comes after the ending is something no one prepares you for. Normalcy. The kind that doesn't sparkle, doesn't ache, doesn't demand explanation. Just mornings that start and evenings that close without fear tucked between them. I don't tell my story often, not because I'm ashamed, but because it no longer needs telling to validate me. It exists whether I speak it or not. It shaped me, then released me. Sometimes I catch myself doing things my parents never did. Checking expiration dates, leaving notes, asking questions and waiting for real answers. In those moments, I realize I didn't just escape neglect. I broke a pattern. That's the quiet victory no one applauds. The child who was left learned how to stay. The adult who grew from that learned how to protect. Nothing dramatic happens anymore, and that's the point. Drama was never what I wanted. Safety was. Consistency. Presence. They are memories now. Distant ones. I am a life in progress. And finally, completely, I am home.